Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Sheffield, Tricycle's web editor, and I'm pleased to be with you today for a premium event, Poetry and Translation with Wang Ping. We hold these events monthly. If you're not a premium subscriber and would like to attend more events like this for free, you can subscribe at tricycle.org/subscribe or upgrade by accessing your account online or writing to support@tricycle.org. Tricycle is a nonprofit, and if you'd like to learn more about our mission or donate to Tricycle, visit tricycle.org/donate. We'll be leaving some time for questions at the end of this hour-long session. You can ask a question by typing it into the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We'll get to as many of your questions as we can towards the end of this event. Today's Zoom session will also be recorded, and we'll share the replay link in a follow-up email. Great. So my guest today is Wang Ping. So lovely to have you join us today for this Tricycle Premium event, and thank you to all those in attendance. Wang Ping is a Chinese-American poet, writer, editor, photographer, performance and multimedia artist, educator, and translator. Her latest publications are The River Within from 2023 and My Name is Immigrant from 2020. Her essay, Riprap, which uses Gary Snyder's eponymous poem as a springboard to explore the nuances, tricks, contradictions, and even faith required of translation, appears in the winter 2024 issue of Tricycle magazine. That article can be found in the chat. Without further ado, welcome Wang Ping.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this event. And thank you, Tricycle, for publishing the essay. And Andrew Cooper discovered it on Facebook, which is Chinese we call yuan, fate, right? Or destiny. Everything is related, which we'll talk about, more later. So thank you. I'm very honored and delighted to be here.
So great to have you here. So yeah, the article I mentioned is called Riprap, which is named after Gary Snyder's poem of the same name. Ping, would you want to lead us in this session by reading Riprap, both in English and in Mandarin?
I'll be happy to. Riprap. Lay down these words before your mind like rocks, placed solid by hands, in choice of place, set before the body of the mind, in space and time, solidity of bark, leaf, or wall, riprap of things, cobble of milkway, straying planets. These poems, people, lost ponies with dragging saddles, and rocky, surefoot trails. The world's like an endless four-dimensional game of Go. Ants and pebbles in the thin loam, each rock a word, a creek washed stone, granite ingrained with torment of fire and weight, crystal and sentiment linked hot, all change in thoughts as well as things. 切实，在你的意识前，把词语一个个摆好，如同石头被双手固定在选好的位置，把意识定格在时间和空间，结实的树皮、树叶和墙，事物的堆砌，铺出鹅卵石的银河，走岔路的星球，这些诗，这些人，迷路的小马拖着马鞍，在颠簸的山道上行走。这世界是一盘围棋，在四维的空间里永不休止。蚂蚁和鹅卵石嵌在薄薄的土壤，一石一字被溪水洗涤干净。花岗岩一条条纹理诉说火与重量的折磨，水晶与渣子融合，一切无常。我们的意识，我们的物质。 Thank you.
So wonderful. So wonderful to hear you read that in both languages. Obviously, your essay centers on translation and, the difficulties, the tricks, and the joys of, kind of attempting these translations.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit to how this piece came to be, and how did you first get to know Gary Snyder?
Yeah. Everything is kind of like magical. So I came to United States in 1985 to New York City. And then I was doing my grad school at Long Island University in Brooklyn. And then one day I walked into the classroom and thinking it would be 18th century British novels. And turned out it was a wrong classroom. The professor was a poet. It was a creative writing workshop, right? And the professor, Louis Walsh, was one of the New York school poets, and he looked kind of like a beatnik, right? Long hair, flying everywhere, and two shirts, and both shirts were misbuttoned, and and I just thought, who's this crazy person? Does not look like American professor at all. But I was curious. I sat down and wrote my first story, thinking after that I would just leave. Then the professor wrote that you should start writing a novel. And when I saw that, it was just like the Zen Buddhist, just like Zen master, just whacked me on the head, just like boom, just awakened me and thought, yeah, that's why I came to United States to write, to tell my stories, you know? And that is my only workshop, right? And after that, I just finished my like MA degree, and at the end of the semester, I just met by chance, like I walked into Professor Walsh, and he went to the party, and he invited me to the Christmas party. We both got drunk, and then he asked me, Allen Ginsberg is hosting the first American Chinese Poetry Festival. He was looking for a translator. Would you be interested? And I said, yeah, because like the poets, Chinese poets are like our heroes, our idols, right? In China, like Bei Dao, Gu Chen, and and then American side is Allen Ginsberg, Gary Snyder, John Ashbery. And I was not writing poetry at all at that time. I just had like a few stories from the workshop, right? And so I worked with Allen Ginsberg for like almost a year to translate, prepare for the festival. And then the festival began. And at the Modern Art Museum, I was translating, and I was just so nervous, I just couldn't say much. Then I saw in the audience and like a man, very handsome, older, but very handsome, thin looking, and just smiled at me. And just suddenly he put my heart in the right place and I could talk again. So I did my job as a translator smoothly. Then after the reading, we just started talking. And I think his wife, Carol, who later died, was there. And so I met a lot of great, like the best poets from America, the best poets from Beidao. And from this, I just started writing poetry myself, right? And doing translation. And then I moved to Twin Cities, started teaching after I finished my PhD. And I brought Gary Snyder in 2018 to Macalester College for a whole week of chanting, Buddhist meditation, chanting, poetry, lectures on, environmental literature, right? Deep ecology. It was a sensational, like a string of very busy but really great events. And this time we just became friends. Like for some reason, like that was also Gary Snyder's last event, like leaving home to do this long-term, residency. And just for some reason, as soon as we saw each other, we just started laughing like two children, right? Just anything could trigger our heartfelt laughter, right? And then after this event, he invited me to his home. So 2019, I visited him. Then 2020, 2021, 22, 23, I have been visiting him. And mostly we worked, right? And I did a string of like a series of interviews on him about his poetry. Like Axe Handle, Riprap, and beatnik, beat poetry, and also about work and poetry, what it means, and also about Kikitisi, his homestead, like what it means to build a community, right, in the abandoned mining area, right, and to have like kind of like a mecca of arts, right, and so it's on my YouTube, and if you're interested, please go there and just explore. But anyway, so when during the COVID, I started translation. Of course, Gary Snyder is the first poet I started translating. I thought Riprap is a poem that always intrigued me, because it's like, of all the American poetry, right? Some of other poets also, but Riprap is the closest to the essence, the spirit of Chinese poetry, right? The way the sounds, the images, and the words are assembled formed a kind of like swirling world, right? And it's so close to what Ezra Pound discovered in his little booklet called The Chinese Character as a Medium to Poetry. And so when I try to teach it, the American students have really a hard time, right, to feel that swirling. They find it very difficult, right? So I thought, let me translate it so I can really get into it. But when I started translating this poem, boy, I just run into the walls, just like over and over, until I actually, like the essay, I went to him and spent some time and just talked to him a lot about like what it means, the riprap. But the first thing he said is, let's know the word. That I will never forget. Like he got injured, he just broke 3 of his ribs, and he had a hard time moving about, but he insisted carrying out all his dictionaries, piled high on his big like dining room table. And it's just, I remember that. And his son just forbid him to do physical work, and they just started have a little bit scuffling, and it was really fun, that encounter. And then our conversations, and just suddenly, again, it's like a koan, right? Just doing like the words may not be like touching each other, but they are flying off, but sparkling, the meanings, inspirations, images just sparking just everywhere. That's how relationship is about, the crashing and the encountering of two cultures, two languages, right? And two people, and then just new meaning and inspiration and visions just fly off from this kind of, you know, uh, encounters. It's very magical, and a lot of fun. We laugh a lot, so much together, yeah.
It sounds very magical. And,
Yeah.
just like relating that story you just shared with us about, being at MoMA and translating for the Allen Ginsberg event, and then how
Yeah.
Gary kind of like unblocked you in your translation efforts that time. And then how when you're translating Riprap, how, you stood together with Gary and you went to the Sierra Nevada to his home instead there, and he also kind of like helped you there. It makes me think of a term in Buddhism, dharmic transmission,
Yes.
which, when you're passing these teachings and these lineages on to your students, that you have this transmission. And I think poetry works in a very similar way to that transmission quality. Do you think do you agree with that? Because you're a poetry
Yeah.
professor.
Yeah, this is a really great question. Teaching art, right, is very different from teaching science. But there's a lot of overlapping qualities. But how do you teach creativity, right? To me, from my many years, like 2 dozen years of teaching as a poetry professor, until they force me out because I'm not a so-called normal professor. I would take students out into the rivers. Just opening the semester was 4 day, like canoe camping trips through the Minnesota River, just filled with, it's basically also the Trail of Tears, right, for Native Americans. And like along the way, it was guided by Native American historians, storytellers, medicine men and women. And along the way, they just came to our campsites and tell their living history, and that the student just bawling, crying. They never knew what happened, right? It's like hidden history. And then their entire semesters, they're writing, research will be based on the trip, right? This kind of teaching, right? So my teaching is more a role model than teaching. I told my students the less like the first day of teaching, basically I tell them I'm here to take out everything that's being done to you from K to 12, right? I'm here to open all the windows and doors that just nailed shut during those 12 years. And we are all born as artists, poets, and thinkers, writers. These are the gifts that were given to you when you were born. Basically, it's a language, right? And I'm just here to allow you to fall, to fail, and to play, right? Until you can play with grace without fear, right? And usually the result is my students can get their work published the first semester in national magazines. My students became New York Times bestsellers, right? And the big awards from LA Book, and New York Times, and just everything, right? And a lot of my students were actually converted from, science or econs and, anthropology. Then they became my colleagues. They became professors at Macalester College or somewhere else, right? Or they became doctors, lawyers. I just finished writing recommendation letter for my student from almost 10 years ago. And after Japan, 10 years in Japan, he decided to go to law school, right? And I tell them thinking and writing will be your lifelong friends and the most powerful and most useful, like a tool. And so, yeah. So with Gary Snyder, it's the same thing. He never tried to teach me anything, but he is teaching me everything, every minute, every second, just his being, just the way he lives, right? The way he drinks coffee, makes coffee. We had a lot of like, not bickering, but I stay with him a lot, right, in his tatami room. And he has his own way of like making coffee or making toast. And he was showing me how to do it. And we were just like, I would tease him, he would tease me back, right? But I learned like the whole, like how those people, right, like build this whole community, right, from scratch, right? Just these old, old like furniture, old stove, old way of like living off grid all their life, right? They still have, like, they still only use well water, and they only use, they still have no electric connection. They make their own electricity with solar panels, right? Yeah, that's how they live, the whole community, right? And just by being there, I learned like it's like PhD dissertation thing, right? So I never been to Buddhist school, but I would think, but I did work with Tibetan monks. I was a Tibetan monk, Tibetan Buddhist myself, right? But more towards like we work together as artists, right? The Sand Mandala, and so we did quite a few as part of the art installation in Minneapolis and in Texas too, Um, so my monk friend never tried to teach me anything, but again, he was teaching me everything, right? So that transmit, if you look at the dictionary, is like to pass some knowledge or certain things from one place to another, from one person to another, right? But the two parts, one has to cause to have that transmit, right? To happen. And you have to have some materials in order to transmit that. If you're empty, if you don't have the knowledge, you can't. And then on the other, the receiving part, you have to allow that to enter you. So I'm sure you know that a lot of teachers, this student is unteachable, right? It's because the student is not ready to receive, and you can't force the cow to drink the water. You can only lead him to the river, so it takes both sides to do that, right? And so, yeah, that's my relationship with Gary Snyder and my relationship with my students, right? My students I always have a long list of waiting students to come in, and they always achieve the perfect attendance. I don't know if you know, like the college students often like attendance is a big problem, but in my creative writing class, I never had that problem. And they always want to do more. And I never have to tell them, you need to hand me, I never give them deadline. Just said, just bring it in whenever you're ready. And they always want to bring more. They always want more because they know they're doing it for themselves, not for me, right? When you want the knowledge for yourself, when you're asking for it, then you're ready to receive, That's the transmission begin when it begins.
So beautifully said. And, you just pulling out that image of the cow coming into water, it makes me think so much about all the environmental references in Riprap and also in your own poetry. Gary Snyder wrote Riprap inspired by his experiences as a forest lookout and on the trail in Yosemite. And I know that you grew up on a small island in the East China Sea where you fished for years and you were a farmer in a mountain village during the Cultural Revolution. And, your poems touch on a lot of these type of themes. Do you often, how important is drawing from the physical world in your poems and even like when thinking about translation? I guess that's like a two-part question. That's like when you're like looking at a work like Gary's and you're, looking at these, trying to translate, are you like going back to the physical world, going back to these images in order to like kind of get the actual transmission of what he was saying? And then also in your own work, how do you explore the physical world?
Right. Yeah. Well, apparently when I was trying to, that's the first question, then I'll go back to the other, you have a lot of questions. You ask many questions. So come back to translating riprap, right? Apparently, I thought I knew everything. I thought I was in that world of riprap, but I was not, right? That happens to all of us a lot. We think we know, but we don't, right? Which is normal. That's fine. It's not a problem, So translation is the best reading of a poem, and also a story, whatever you're translating, because you've got to enter. If you don't enter, you're just scratching the surface. You cannot translate, right? So the riprap, even though I taught this poem so many years when I was a professor, I thought I knew, but when I started translating, I just ran into walls, right? I just could not. I was floating, right, on the surface, trying to knock and like crash and trying to get in the door, but I couldn't until I went to Kick It Dizzy, right? And stayed with Gary Snyder for a whole week. I think that is actually 10 days, I stayed. And it was toward the end, I was finally in through the scuffling of carrying the dictionary back and forth, and through, like, he took me into the mountains of Sierra Nevada, and there was some very interesting magical encounter with a young arranger who was talking about Alan Watts and Gary Snyder, not realizing he was talking to Gary Snyder. you know, so yeah, he didn't even know Gary Snyder was still alive, but he just thought, like, we asked him why he was there. He just said he was influenced by Gary Snyder and Alan Watts' writing and poetry, and then he started talking about them. And I look at Gary Snyder and I look at him. I said, "Do you know who you're talking to?" And he said, "No." Like, I said, "This is Gary Snyder." He said, "No, you are kidding me." I said, "No, this is a true, like, very living, laughing Gary Snyder." And we just laughed for 10 minutes, And there's a film about it there on my YouTube channel. And so being on the mountain, right? Being in the world of Gary Snyder, it is a physical world, yes, but it's also a very spiritual world, because of the energy. And every day, Gary, like, even though he's 94 years old, he still does everything himself, right? And so he built his house and all the other structures by his hands, right? He chopped wood still, and he still writes every day, right? And I don't know if Gary is also a choreographer. It's really beautiful, his writing. So our brain, I have a medical degree in Chinese medicine, and half of it training is Western, and my focus is neurology, neuroscience, right? The brain, right? So our brain is wired to see, to feel the world, to see the world, to talk about the world through our hands and feet, right? So Gary's not like, it's kind of loop of feeding, right? If a child is, if an infant is born without, like, seeing or hearing, have the five senses stimulation, the child will never see or hear, right? And because the brain has no the feedbacks, right? And no no experience, and would not, the wires, the nerves would not grow, to make the connection, right? And also our brain is plastic. If you don't use it, you lose it, right? So this constant touching, right, with our hands and with our five senses, with the physical world, is so important to our brain and our spiritual world, right? So, but at the same time, the physical world is the base, and we have to go beyond that, right? And the physical world is often just riddled with, the work, sweat, blood, and violence, and, pain and suffering, right? And I think it's, to me, from, my own experience, is this is just like materials for all the ladder for us to enter, to transcend into the spiritual world, right? And the art is the key, is the ladder for us, And Gary Snyder often says, bliss takes a lot of work. Bliss never just like falls into your lap. You have to work for it, right? And the Argentinian, my favorite writer and poet, Borges, right? In his brilliant essay on blindness, is also, so why we never write about happiness, right? Why all the great art, poetry, and writing is always about pain and suffering. Why? Because pain is its own end. You already reached the goal. You don't need to write about it. But pain, we write about pain as a way to transcend, to rise above that, right? And that is the journey of life. It's our lifelong journey, just constant, right? And so the constant transcendence, transformation, and transmission from the physical world into the whatever the other world, right? And so that's, I think it's the purpose, and that's also the play, and we do it through play, not through the somber, and it doesn't have to, That's why whenever I'm with Gary Snyder, we laugh, and any problem, we laugh, any bickering, we laugh. Then we always end up just being happy. Just like two children playing without doubt or suspicion, right? Like the Ezra Pound's brilliant translation of the letter of a merchant's wife, right? Two small children play without doubt or suspicion, I think we should all do that, right? Because life is full of pain, and the Buddhism has already figured out, right? This just suffering, 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 right? And but if we know how to play and how to transform the material, the painful material, into something, joyful, right? And then we are happy, Yeah.
That was lovely. Yeah, and I that pain is definitely there. I recently was reading your book. My Name is Immigrant. Lovely book. Everyone should order a copy. But a lot of it is touching on these tragic stories of these immigrant stories. And I love what you were just saying about how we write about pain to transcend it. But there's also an element of it where you want to tell these stories. You want people to know. You want this awareness of it. In the same way you brought your poetry students on, the Trail of Tears. You're like, and having them be with indigenous activists and leaders, is that you want them to be learning about these histories that have been covered up. So how much of writing for you is about this kind of making sure that your ideas of history or these unspoken stories are told, and how much of it is speaking for these people who no longer have a voice because they aren't around anymore?
Uh, um, Well, I wouldn't say I'm speaking for them. I think I'm more a vessel for them. So, and often I do ask this question to myself: do I have the right to tell the story, right? And who am I, right? And I believe I can tell the story because I have very similar experiences as an immigrant myself, living in America, and also growing up in China, um, with just my hands are always constantly just in winter frostbites, just covered. You can see bones, right? Because there's no heat or electricity or water in the house, right? It's colder inside than outside, And I was hungry most of the time, right? And I was dressed in rags all the time. But the most painful thing is I could not read books because during the Cultural Revolution, all the books were burned, right? And so my sole goal was to how to get my hands on any books so I could read them, right? And I was beaten constantly when I discovered that I was reading those banned books, right? But was I unhappy? I don't remember. I remember like the joy of discovering each book, right? And I don't remember much about the pain of being beaten, right? I don't remember the pain of hunger or cold. I just only remember the joy, the dream, right? That I want to go to college at any cost, right? And I did. I remember the extreme joy of like getting into Beijing University, like the best university in China, right? Most difficult, was my 2 years of school. I taught myself, right? Through stolen books, through those forbidden books, right? And I got into the best university, right? So I remember all those miracles, those magic moments, right? And so so I I I can feel the pain and also their hope of those immigrants, right? And those dead souls. I could feel their dreams, right? And I just want to broadcast their dreams, which is also the dream, not just for all immigrants, but for everyone as a life, for life, right? Even the tree or the grass or flower, right? They all want to be able to express themselves, right? I think that's the purpose. Like to be alive is to be able to express that I am alive, and and that's the ultimate joy, right? When we get a poem published, and an art like on display, right? And when we can communicate with another being, another life, right? Sometimes I talk to trees, to a flower, right? And when I cook, I talk to the vegetables, right? And they tell me how to cook. I'm a really good cook, by the way. So I cook for Gary Snyder all the time. He would just when I visit him, I would stop by at the biggest grocery store nearby and buy a big box of food and I'll go there and cook every day, then we feast, right? And that is also part of my expression that I'm alive, to be able to taste it. By the way, cooking is like writing poetry, right? And I just create, freely. But you have to know the materials well, right? Just I have to know the nature of Chinese characters and the English language, right? In order to write a good poem that other people can feel the musicality, the images, and the content inside, So, and for me, I write a lot about the spirits, the dead people, dead souls, and also their dreams. is partly because I do believe the so-called visible world, the reality, is only a small fraction of what we can see and feel and what we know. The majority is dark matter. And even though we cannot see them, they do exist, right? And for me, poetry is the play, a dance between this visible world and the invisible world, right? And when I was teaching as a poetry professor, my first assignment is to tell students to keep a dream diary, right? They have to write down their dreams upon awakening, and until they just do it, and then your dreams will become like lucid, and your dreams you start working magic in your dreams, right? A lot of visions come to me at 3 a.m., right? In Chinese medicine, that's also the heart and the liver are working, right? The most active, right? That's at 3 a.m. And for some culture is when the ghosts come out, right? The spirits come out, right? And so that's why that's when also like the two worlds are most connected. They are free. The gates were open, for you to travel back and forth. And that's when I solve all my problems that I cannot solve during the day, and all the new ideas come to me. Like lately, I woke up with like, I'm going to, put like bring Tao Yuanming, that's like almost 2,000-year-old Chinese poet, and it was Gary Snyder and other American poets who write about this kind of nature poetry. And then I will have Chinese calligraphy artists to draw or write the calligraphy. So it will be like half poetry, translation, and calligraphy artwork, right? To put together. I think the world needs this kind of like, spiritual, artistic, beautiful work, So I've been doing that these days, and it's a lot of fun. So yeah, dream is extremely important. And poets and artists, I think we are spiritual workers basically, and we are witches and wizards. And so I tell students, like, if you're serious about being a poet and writer, you cannot be normal being. You cannot be just sitting, just enough for this visible world. You have to be able to travel between like different realms. Yeah.
I love that so much. I'm going to ask a few more questions, but yeah, a reminder to everyone who is watching to put some questions in the Q&A tab or even in the chat, and we can get around to them if we have time before this wraps up. But yeah, just the imagery you were just presenting, just going back to Riprap, where words are laid down before your mind like rocks. A lot of the images and words of your poetry starting to have like a life of their own, almost like a three-dimensional quality to them. And it almost only struck me this morning that is actually kind of almost like a type of animism, almost like a spirituality that certain words contain, certain phrases or even objects that you can just kind of pluck out and look from all sides. And I see a lot of that in your writing. How do you achieve that effect in your poetry? And then how do you pass that on to your students?
Oh, yeah. Thank you. Um, I think I was very lucky to be born in start learning Chinese. And Chinese words are basically three-dimensional. First of all, it's image based, right? So it's visual. And second, it's tonal language, right? And all the words end with a vowel, and all the words has 4 tones. In reality, it has more, the actual speaking has more than just 4 tones. But when you're learning, we learn 4 tones, which also change in the real situation, right? So like right? And ma. So you can hear the music there already, right? And the formation of the language, we cannot say ma in writing poetry, we can never write poems like that. So the rules, kind of loose rules, right, of Chinese writing, so the four tones have to have variation to form the waves, right? So for example, the 5 words, for example, like the most famous, one of the most famous Li Po's poem, very simple, is 床前明月光，疑是地上霜, right? You can hear the musicality, right? So if all the words are 床前明月光，疑是地上霜, it's not musical anymore, just flat, right? So I grew up in this musical visual language, which at its formation, the writing, right, is like a Lego parts, right? So we have a set of words like the sun, the moon, right, the water, the 3 dots, just image based. Then we use those basic components like Lego parts. Then we form our words and concepts, right? So often a word has several concepts, like 江河, rivers and streams, the big rivers and small rivers, right? 江河, both words have 三点水, that watermarks, right? And then the right side is one is for the sound, right? 江河, right? And also, for example, for the word bright, being like light, right? We have sun and moon together next to each other to form the meaning of bright, right? So all these things, a word is its own, a Chinese character is its own kingdom, right? And but it's not cemented. It's like a riprap, right? The stones go there loosely, but somehow create their own order and stability, right? But it's also, it can dance, right? Like the houses in Japan, right? They built loosely to dance with the earthquakes, right? In order to withstand the moving, right? If you cement everything, then the language is dead, right? Anything, if you solidify it, cement it, it becomes dead, right? So yeah, so I feel very fortunate to grow up in this, but unfortunately, I grew up without realizing the beauty, right, of this language until I came to America, and I just like pick up by chance Ezra Pound, the little booklet, the Chinese character as a media for poetry. I just suddenly like it's like the wide fields, right? Mind, and Ezra Pound just throw a fire and just explode, just suddenly everything just opened up to me. Then I encountered Gary Snyder, right? And just everything started clicking, So I started writing poetry, novels, short stories, translation, and art all at once without like doing anything. The only training is that one mistake that I walked into the workshop by mistake, So that again improved that we're all these things, like we were born with it, right? And just go out there and play, and because it's language, everything is embedded in language, in our language, all the beauty, civilization, and our language works really like our brain, and our brain really is wired and mapped and works just like the sky, all the stars and constellation in the universe, and we're connected, right? So if we're open, and then the sound, right? I actually wrote a little bit when your question, for example, like the sound, just one sound of Om, right? I chanted Om a lot. I'm a yogi, right? So I chant Om a lot, but I did not realize the function of Om until I started singing. I'm a soprano, So my teacher told me how to use my head, right, and my chest and my diaphragm, just connect them through the sound of Om. And when I got it, I literally feel the word, the sound, right, becomes somehow an object, just opening, a live object, just become the word becomes physical, right? Just opening, connecting my entire inside being, right? And just goes up through Bai Hui, which is in Chinese medicine is like the spot is like 100 gathering is all the young energy ends here and begins here and connected to the sky, to the cosmos, right? And when you use the sound of Om to open this up, right? Just suddenly it's like, I don't know, sometimes you just feel the nirvana kind of like enlightenment, right? And through that sound of Om, and so that's, yeah, it's very interesting. It's kind of like physical training that turns into kind of spiritual awakening, so.
Okay, so we got a question. We're going to answer it live. So this is from one of the attendees. They're asking you, is it too presumptuous for a lay practitioner to want to translate Buddhist material into one's own native language? Or is a recent and incipient understanding of the Dhamma fair enough to work towards this goal?
I think well, okay, I cannot say, I've never translated religious materials, but I can only relate to you through my translation of poetry, right? And my first book of translation, I worked in collaboration with American poets like Allen Ginsberg, the best poets, right? And I picked the great Chinese poets and I work with American poets, right? It's like a marriage. My main thing is, several purposes. I want to bring Chinese poetry to America, but also want to learn from American masters, right? By working with them, right? And people laugh at me and say, who are you? You just began to write poetry. How dare you to translate these poems? And some Chinese poets didn't even bother to answer my request for their, to translate their work. But through this, but I persisted, right? And I also worked with American poets and who helped me a lot. I really learned a lot from working with them, right? And some are not easy, and some are just like perfect marriage, right? And so I think there's no, I think this, if you have the vision and the urge and desire and the energy to do this, right? And you should try, right? And you won't know until you actually try, and then you never know what will happen, right? My first translation project is quite a success. Hanging Loose Press published it. And then I just finished another big one. It's called When Wind Blowing Across the Grasses, right? Poems from the Yangtze River and the Yellow River, right? It's I want to bring the poets along the two rivers, right? I think poetry and the location, right? This is space. And then I connect them through the seasons, right? The Chinese have 24 solar terms. It's all like, 24 like sections, right? And telling you what to do, and telling you the weather, the season, the change of the seasons, and the harvesting time or planting time. So that is the time and the space, just crisscross, right? I want to bring that to China. This time I'm doing solo, but I'm working with Gary Snyder for the introduction, right? So yeah, and people say, who are you to do this? I said, well, I may not like be the Nobel Prize laureate, but I have I've lived many years, and I've seen a lot, I've suffered a lot, and I've worked very hard, and I will give my best. That's all I can say, you know. So I hope I answered the question.
No,
Yeah.
that was really great.
Thank-
And then I think we have time for one more right before we close. And this is just from the chat. Chandra asks, any advice for new writers?
Ah, don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. Don't be afraid to fall, to make errors. And don't be afraid to be rejected for publication hundreds of times until you get there. Persistent. And of course, you have to do the work first, right? You have to set a time every day. Morning is my time. If it's noon or midnight for you, just set a time and just do it. No matter what, even if you just sit there, nothing comes to you. You just still go there, go to that place, right? And do it, you know? And when you have some product, then send it out, because that's the ultimately you want to communicate with someone. And don't be afraid of being rejected, you know. So fearless, shameless, tireless. Is that the word, tireless? Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think I can't think of a better question to end on. Wang Ping, thank you so much.
Thank you
And
so much.
thank
Yeah,
you everyone for joining us. Again, a link to the article Riprap can be found in the chat. Tricycle is a nonprofit. If you'd like to make a donation, visit tricycle.com/donate. If you enjoyed this event and want more monthly conversations with Buddhist teachers and thinkers, visit tricycle.org/subscribe to become a premium subscriber, or write to us at support@tricycle.org to upgrade your existing subscription. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks again, Ping.
thank
I'll
you.
see you around.
Yeah.